We're going to go ahead and jump into this. If you'll go to that next slide. Can anybody tell me what that is? DNA. Good, good. Not only can you read, y'all are smart. But what is DNA? When we talk about DNA, what are we talking about? Huh? Genetic makeup. Good, good. So we got some smart people here. To be more precise, DNA, the word itself, or that initial, stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. And that's DNA is much easier to say, so we refer to it as DNA. But if you take a look, that is the building block of life, where everything starts. So it is a design. As you can see, it is demonstrated by what we call a double helix. And without getting too in the weeds scientifically, that is the basis for you and I. That is where we start. So when your good-looking mom and your good-looking dad get together, once they become one, that's where we start. It is a single cell that multiplies, divides, and it is the blueprint for everything that lives and grows. Next slide, please. So, what does that mean? There is a service out now called 23andMe. And if you submit your DNA to that service, what they will do for you is they will take a look at your genetic code, and they will say, based on, and I want y'all to follow this, based on mitochondrial DNA that come from not your father, but your mother. And when I began researching this, I was like, why mom, not dad? We're such a patriarchal society, you would think that's where our lineages come from. But the truth of the matter is, the saying goes, mama's baby, daddy's maybe. So the way that we for sure know, because I can have a brother or a sister, and we can have two different fathers, but we can't have two different mothers. We will have to have that same DNA. So what 23andMe did is they used what was called the Human Genome Project that was started in 1990. Now, when I was in high school, it was the height of this Human Genome Project. And what they did is they literally went and took all of the genes, the 3 billion some odd genes that we have that could come up with every combination of person that we see, and they mapped it out. Now, the purpose of this originally was not only to take a look and say, well, how did we come to be, and how do these pairs of genes get together and show up and manifest in the variety of ways that we see? But they wanted to know for medical purposes as well, that if I submit to 23andMe, not only can we take a look at where you came from, but what are some of the possibilities that could happen? They could see the genes that could potentially cause different diseases like cancer. They can even take a look and see disease of potential addictions that you may have, like alcoholism, and different things in order to prepare people and say, if you have this genetic makeup, there are certain things that you might need to stay away from. There are certain environments that you might not want to be and expose yourself to, because those things could activate those negative genes. But overall, they were able, through the Human Genome Project, to map out everything, all of the DNA that makes us who we are. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So what does that look like? So genes work in two ways. We have what's called a genotype and what's called a phenotype. Now, genotype is what you see here where it says genotypes. Those are the genes, the actual alleles that come together and they form a genotype, a phenotype, which is the physical manifestation of those genes. So as you can take a look and see, because this young man here and this young man here have the same genome, genotype, phenotypically, or the physical characteristics manifested, and it is easy to identify the hereditary markers that make these people family. We can recognize. There are times in the classroom that I have students who come from different families that I grew up with. Now, I may not have ever seen them, but I've seen their parents. And when they show up, immediately, oh, that's a Jackson. Oh, that's a Walden. Oh, that's a Snipes. And if you've lived in Greenville any amount of time, I'm sure that that has happened to you. Why? Because your genetic makeup, your genotype, has resulted in a physical characteristics that makes you identifiable and ties you to that family. So, that young man in the middle and that young man on the end look a lot alike, but they're not the same person. That's, of course, Caleb, and then over in the corner, that's cute Joel when he was young, and of course, Melanie there. But genotype does not always determine phenotype. What does that mean? So when we look, we have what's called dominant genes and we have recessive genes. Those dominant genes are the ones that tend to express physically more so than recessive genes. So heterozygous, which is that middle one, dominant would be that big B, recessive would be that little b. And so unless you get two recessive genes together, that won't show that physicality. If it is paired with a dominant gene, the phenotype is going to result in that dominant gene. I have to have two recessive genes in order for that trait to show up. Now, what does this have to do with anything? I am glad you asked. Next slide, please. So, in the spirit world, it works that same way. We not only get a physical set of genes from mom and dad, but we also get those spiritual genes, those things that they pass on that either intentionally or unintentionally sometimes can show up in our lives and manifest. So it can be in your genotype, as I said, to have certain characteristics that if you stay away from that environment, it won't show up. But if you aren't careful, those genes can manifest and express phenotypically. Let's take a look at what does that look like in the Bible. So when Abraham was living out the promise that God gave to him and said, hey, your wife Sarah is going to bear your child, she started to look good. She looked so good that as they were passing through Egypt, Pharaoh said, hey, I want that one. And do you know what Abraham did? Instead of telling Pharaoh, no, that's my wife, he said, that's my sister. And it wasn't until God went and told Pharaoh, hey, you need to leave her alone. That's his wife. And Pharaoh had to go back and tell Abraham, why you do that? Now, why did you go and tell that? Now, what happened? Isaac is born. And look what he does. Remember, Isaac was not there when his father said what he said to Pharaoh. He was not around. He was not even in existence yet because his mother is who? Sarah. But what happened when Isaac got put in the same situation? Guess what? He went and told Abimelech, that good-looking woman ain't my wife, that's my sister. Now, so clearly, even without him being present, remember, he was not in existence in that moment. He took on something unknowingly from his father. And he enacted that same way. Phenotypically, it showed up. Genotypically, it was there. He inherited it, and it showed up phenotypically. So what does God say about that? In Deuteronomy 5, Moses is coming down from and giving the people the 10 Commandments, and he makes this statement, and I think it's very telling. It says, you shall not bow down to them or other gods. He says, I'm jealous. You don't worship any God but me. But here are a couple of promises that I make. I will punish the children for the sins of their parents to the third and fourth generation. Somebody say third and fourth. But look at the other side of this promise. But showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I think that's a little bit more promising if you follow God's love, because look at the extension. Even though the sins of the parents are visited on the children, it's only to the third and fourth generation. But 1,000 generations will receive blessings, because that's what we're talking about. We have what we call generational curses. That's what people talk about. Those are those genetics that you receive spiritually that aren't right. They showing up in your genome. That's why you got to be careful of what environments that you put them in, because you don't want those to express. But if you follow God's love and law, 1,000 generations. Now, the question should be in your mind, well, how long is a generation? Next slide, please. So, to answer that question, in familiar terms, in terms of family, a generation is usually between 20 and 30 years. And the reason we classify it that way is most families are started in the 20s or 30s is when people start having babies. So when we see a separation of generation, we're talking about 20 to 30 years. Now, we can put math to it. He said, if your children don't follow, if the parents don't follow what I've said and they break the laws of God and the sins will be visited on them for 3 and 4 generations, we're talking about close to a century, right? Almost 100 years for something your forefather did. But on the reverse, if we look at 1,000 generations that God promised to bless for the people who love them, 1,000 times 20 or 30, we're looking at 20,000 years of people who are blessed, who share that common DNA. Now, to help you identify, what I did is also put what sociologists are now using to classify generations. And if you look up there, every generation that is represented here is in this room. You can take a look. But what is to note is now, once we get to Gen Alpha, and now if you were born, and the timing may vary for different groups, but if you were born in 2025, you are officially a part of Generation Beta. And that group moving forward to 2039 will be a different generation. But for the first time in recent history, since they started tracking this, what has happened? Gen Alpha and Gen Z are the first generations to show regression. What does that mean? Every generation, starting with the silent generation, also called the builder generation, that's grandma. Her generation started to perpetuate that every generation after that started doing better. Every generation from that time got better. They got smarter. They attained more wealth. They attained more social movements and taking care of people. Each generation advanced up until recently, Gen Z. We started to see a regression. Those groups didn't learn as much. They don't know as much. They aren't attaining and being as successful as the generations previous. And I had to question myself because I've been a witness to this. What happened? We've had all sorts of distractions that set in. This is the COVID era. These are the children who are digital natives, where we saw Instagram and all of the iPhones and all of the digital world that became greatly available, who research has showed us, because that information is available, we no longer have to seek it. And so it is not powerful to that generation. They don't see the value of information because it's at the push of a button. So we valued information and we continue to grow based on that idea. So there's a regression. But I think there's also a spiritual regression that's happening as well. Church has been de-emphasized. If you poll most people, not just the students that I see, but if you poll most people, church, or even going to and dealing with and reading from the Bible is not a part of their life. It's not a part of their socialization. Now, here in Texas, we're doing our best to combat that. We put the 10 Commandments in the classroom. They're actually making the Bible one of the parts of literature that must be included in the school system. But the recognition was, why is this generation going backwards? And it's because we have more and more taken away involving God in the lives of the people in our country. So, next slide, please. So what needs to happen? We have to understand our genome and understand that we have to undergo what's called a genetic modification. Now, we now have food that is available that they call GMO food, right? That stands for genetically modified materials. What are they done? So when these plants or when these foods that we want to harvest, if they environmentally can't survive, they now have a way to combine the DNA and literally change what that seed producing plant does and how it's able to produce. It's stronger. It can withstand more things. It can be resistant to more things. And so, with this genetically modified food, what once was subject to pestilence, what once was subject to being taken out, is now been fortified to where it will last and it will get to us. So we have to understand that same thing with our inheritance. In 2 Corinthians, it says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, they are the same. Is that what it says? It is a new creation. The old has gone, the new is here. So, first thing that we have to understand is we have to undergo a genetic modification if we're going to stay in God, if we are going to be true followers of Christ. In Ephesians, it says, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitudes of your mind, and put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. In other words, I used to have a pastor that said, I want to be like Jesus. This is telling you, in order to be a Christian, in order to be identified with that DNA, this is what you have to do. You got to set those old things aside. Now, side note, in that same passage, he talks about, and he goes into detail about, what does this new creation look like? What does that mean? And guess what, y'all? All of the things that the world says you need to have and be a part of your DNA, it literally shoots down. It says, hey, you got to start treating people like with love, and I mean everybody. It says we got to work in unity. You got to stop lying. You got to stop stealing. You got to stop being, it even says, watch what you say. You got to stop talking bad about people. Now, pausing there, I am guilty as the next person of going on the internet and seeing what the tea is. And what is the tea usually? A bunch of mess about somebody or some group of people. If we are going to be a new creation, if we are going to express phenotypically the genes that God put in us, we can't be a part of that. We can't be a party to that. So, Be mindful. Be mindful. I'm talking to me too. Be mindful of what you are doing. How are you expressing that genotype, what God already put inside you? Okay. Next slide, please. So, what is our genotype? What has God set forth for us? So, there are a couple things very quickly. In Romans 12, he says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Now, in Romans 12 as well, he talks about the body of Christ, that we are one. We have different functions within that body, but at the heart of it, genotypically, we look just alike. Now, phenotypically, how does that play out? Some of us are pastors, some of us are preachers, some of us are teachers, some of us are prophets, evangelists, so on and so forth. He outlines that. But he says we're still one body. We still are one genome. How that is expressed is then left up to you by practicing what we talked about in Ephesians 4. Stay away from all of these things. Let go. He even says, don't be like the Gentiles. They are deceiving themselves. They have fooled themselves into believing that what they say is right. He even says they become insensitive. They don't even know that they're doing evil anymore. It don't even bother them. It doesn't register. So you have to be mindful. That's why your mind has to be renewed. Secondly, when Jesus himself is approached about this same subject and says, God, what is my DNA? What is my genome supposed to look like? And he makes that famous statement. He says, these are the only two things that matter at the center of your DNA. That should be the middle. Love me with all your heart, all your mind, all your understanding. And then the second is likened to the first. Love your neighbor. It didn't say love your neighbor on how they treat you. Love your neighbor as long as they ain't talk bad about me today. Let me love my neighbor as long as we're in good standing and I know they don't want no smoke. That's not what it says. It says, hey, your DNA needs to be, this is the genome. You've got to take care of these two things. And then all the other stuff. All these other laws, all the things that we're talking about that will unite us and let us take care of one another will be added. But you got to take care of those two first and foremost. How do we show God's love? We got to stay in his word. We got to know what he's talking to us about and telling us. How do we love our neighbor? That's even practical. If I wouldn't do it to me, don't do it to your neighbor. And your neighbor is anyone that you come in contact with. That is not a locale. That's not just the people at school. That's not just the people I work with. That's not even just the people in my physical neighborhood. Your neighbor, we are a global community now. You can get online and your neighbor can literally be someone in Asia or in Africa because we are that interconnected now. So, finally, next slide, final slide. I'm almost done, y'all. So, phenotypically, how should that manifest? So we know what our genome should look like. So characteristically, physically, what should that look like? It tells you right here. In Matthew, he says, you know what? You'll be able to identify the ones who follow me because they're going to look like me. You'll know them by their fruit. He says, no, you know, a good tree that bears good fruit, you will be able to see it bears good fruit. You don't have figs bearing thorns. But and this is the part I think that people de-emphasize, but we need to be mindful of. Bad trees will bear bad fruit. So if you're hanging around and you look at the fruit on your tree and you like, oh, my fruits, and that bottom verse in Galatians tells you what those fruits are, what you should look like. In other words, just like you're able to identify my daughter, they ought to be able to identify you in the world and say, oh, that's one of Jesus's kids. he's acting like them. At the end of that verse, it says in verse 20, yes, you can identify a tree by its fruit, so you can identify people by their actions. Notice not what they say, but what are you doing? Because I can say all day, I love you. I take care, but if I'm smacking you in the face every time I see you for no reason, and I'm fussing at you and cussing at you, that's not love. So my actions don't line up. My phenotype ain't lining up with the genotype. So if my phenotype, the characteristics that are displayed, don't look like this, it's time to examine. It's time to do a fruit check. And what are the fruits? Love, joy, peace, patience. Let's stop there. And I really want you to take a second and just examine. Is that what my fruit looks like? And you don't have to answer me. You ain't even got to look at your neighbor. I want you to just ask in your head. Just those. Have I been a person that invokes peace? Have I been a person that invokes love? Am I even smiling? Do I even look approachable? I know, and this ain't been none of y'all, but back in the day, when we used to go to church, some of the meanest people I've ever met sat in the pews, and they wouldn't even smile. Yes, I love Jesus. You don't love God? You better love. That is not the phenotype that God has put forth. He made it clear. So we've got to make sure that we invest and we start to look like what our DNA says that we're supposed to look like. People should know you right off the bat. Just like they can figure out what family you come from, they ought to be able to tell you, man, that Melanie, full of faithfulness. That Melanie, full of love. And Lisa, full of kindness, full of gentleness, full of patience. That's what people should be referring to you by. That's how they should know you. So I'll end here. What led me and inspired me to this moment, we were having some difficulty at our house, and there were a lot of things going on. And Maddie doesn't even remember saying this, but it stuck with me. She said to me after everything had worked out and we had gotten out of calamity, she said, you know what, Daddy? I prayed to the God of my grandfather. And I want to say that again. She said, Daddy, I prayed to the God of my grandfather. Now, why that struck me in particular is I said, ooh, that's the genetics. Look at it. That's the spiritual DNA. Look at what happened. We now have our pastor's son in this position. And guess what? Spiritually and phenotypically looks like his father. He even works the same job. So be mindful. Be intentional. Make sure that you're calibrating, doing your fruit check. And check out your fruit with your friends too. Let them know, if they love you, if they really love you, they'll tell you the truth. But they'll tell you the truth in love. So make sure you go back, look at Ephesians 4, and it'll break down to you how to create that new mind, how to keep it renewed. Go back and make sure you're checking your fruit. And make sure that characteristically, phenotypically, that you are looking like your father. Amen.